We'd like to thank you for the opportunity to be here and present the great concepts we think we put together on the St. George Catholic Church. Briefly, I'd like to introduce our team. I'm Jerry Hebert with Grace and Hebert Architects. Christy Rigby, partner in the firm, manages our interior design group. David Hebert, the project architect. Fred Grace is actually our liturgical consultant, but he's unable to be here today, and Joey Furr, our landscape architect. A little bit about what we've done in the past. Fred sits on the liturgical committee. I sit on the Diocesan Building Review Board, and one of the references we'll use and talk about a little bit about is Built on Living Stones, issued by the National Conference of Catholic Bishops. It is the basis of design that we use for designing a Catholic church. You know, one of the things that we committed to was communicating with the parish, and we've done a lot of different things, dot pulling with the committees, follow-up discussions, but this will be our first town hall meeting, which will give everybody here an opportunity to participate as we break into small groups and tell us what you think and what we can make better on the presentation we put forward today. St. George has a great history dating back to the 1960s when they used a temporary structure as a school gymnasium as a church. In 1980s, an existing church building was renovated. We haven't been involved, but there's been a lot of study, as Father mentioned earlier, about what needs to happen in the future. And we've been brought on to really work on the new church, and Early Childhood Learning Center would become part of the existing church. So we think there's a lot of opportunities here, and working with the committee to really create a great worship space and to really an opportunity inside the existing church to look at the Early Childhood Learning Center and really have a unique space for the kids to learn. One of the things we always try to do is to work on the guiding principles, and we've done this with the committee over the past couple of months, or I guess 6 months. And I would like to just read the guiding principles to you and talk a little bit about how important they are and how they basically guide the design process and are the basis from which we move forward. So being rooted in over 100 years of faith, the St. George Parish community will create a safe and welcoming place of worship, celebrating and learning. The design of the campus master plan will engage the community by promoting interaction among the diverse families of our church and school. The church will be the cornerstone of the campus. It will have a humble yet inviting presence and become a beacon to the Catholic faith community. The renovation of the old church will provide a safe and inviting learning environment where the youngest members of the parish community can be formed in faith and grow in learning. So these principles are what we kind of base our decisions on as we move forward with each of the design concepts. So as we went through and we kind of worked with the committee, we did a dot pull where everybody, kind of identified the highest priority items they thought were important. So improve access and egress to the church, improve visibility and enhanced presence of the church was really important. A safe school, yet accessible to the church. So how do we try to improve, the next one's kind of combined with it, improving campus security. Obviously enhancing the oak grove and trying maintaining as many oaks as possible, which we think is really important also. Improve the dead-ended cemetery was a minor one, but it was important. And secure a learning center site from rear drives and access. So basically, looking at the vehicular access, the pedestrian access on the site, and campus security in general. So a team of people actually went and visited the church, and I'm going to let Christy kind of walk you through each of the church projects they visited and what they saw and what they brought back. And David also will be talking about this.
So we visited several churches, but there were three that really stood out. And the first being Christ the Redeemer is a very large-scale facility, and the plan that you're looking at right now, take note of number 16, which is the narthex. So it's a very large gathering space, great for fellowship before and after any mass. And number 7, which is really the nave of the church, you can notice that the seating is more of a radial plan. We saw this really in the majority of the churches. Out of the 7 that we saw, I think there's just one that was more of a straight kind of a format. And also the number 4 is the sanctuary area, where it's a very large platform. And if you look through that, on number 3, the chapel was located behind. So As we visited all these different sites, we started to picking up on elements that were recurring in these new churches, and then started looking at some of the massing and the material details.
So looking at the exterior of the church, it was pretty consistent that a lot of the committee members thought that a bell tower should definitely be part of the architecture, trying to create a presence on Segan Road and using the bell tower as kind of a beacon for the Catholic community to start to identify the church location on the site. Another item you see here is from the exterior of the church. You couldn't really see all the stained glass. It was real clean and contemporary, but whenever you walk into the narthex of the church, which is the lobby or the gathering space, there's this real ornate stained glass that sits right behind the exterior storefront. So you get all these colors and a really pleasant view whenever you're leaving the church and standing inside of the narthex. Here also, they brought in a lot of natural light to the church, which we feel strong about also. We think it's very important to get natural light as much as possible over the altar and over the main body of the church, but make sure that we control it so that people sitting in the pews and the congregation doesn't have to worry about glare from the natural light. Here you can see the chapel, which is on the back of the church, along with the tabernacle. It's got a small altar. This kind of replicates the wood structure and ceiling as the church, so there's a connection between the two, and the tabernacle, which you'll see is similar in our plan, is centered on the chapel and the church. So you maintain the visibility from the main body of the church and the chapel, so that way your adoration, when you have it in the chapel, is to the same tabernacle that's visible from the church and not a separate tabernacle.
So another church we visited was St. Martha Catholic Church. This is a very large-scale church. Again, if you'll notice, the narthex, the large gathering space, as well as the nave was large and radial, just as you saw before. Some of the interesting spaces that we were looking at, really right off of the narthex, were how they dealt with the ministry spaces, as well as how they dealt with rooms for nurseries or any type of storage. So this church had aisles on either side, and we've kind of taken that into studies and came back when you'll see that we have some aisleways, but they're not as grand as these. The other interesting part was the integration of some of the ramps and some of the details into the space. As well, again, you'll notice that the chapel is located in the back.
Also, you'll notice here the tabernacle, again, is centered on the sanctuary between the chapel and the sanctuary. So that way the adoration to the tabernacle is to the same tabernacle that's visible from the nave. Here again, you can start to see some repetition in the massing. You've got a large open entrance with a bell tower that sits alongside of it. Really a traditional form, but creates a strong presence.
So once we're inside the church, and you'll notice from the plans that the baptismal fonts mostly are in the front of the church, also used for the holy water and baptisms. But as far as materiality, we had majority of the facilities had wood structure with a wood deck, and the flooring was a hard surface, whether it was a true stone or a tile type product. And David mentioned earlier the natural light. In the view to the right hand side, you can see that their narthex has a great deal of natural light coming into the space, which is nice and does glow into the main body of the church, but it's controlled as you get further into it.
Here again is just another view of the interior. You can really get a feel for how the wood pews and the wood trusses and wood decks start to relate to one another. And here you can also see the radial seating a lot better and how they start to wrap around the altar and really give a sense of community.
So at the far end of this view, you'll see in the transept that's the use of a rose window. Again, stained glass was integrated into the majority of the churches. These are elements that the committee has picked up on and elements that we'll study in the use of the new St. George Church.
This is just a shot of the clear story above the altar, which allows for natural light into the space.
The Mary Queen Catholic Church was a church that as you'll notice, that the floor plan for the new St. George Church is modeled similarly off of this one. The body of this church actually seats about 1,400 people. We've kind of borrowed from them a little situation in the seating where we have seating in the back that can be used when there's overflow. And then the seating, the radial seating, again, that recurrent kind of planning really keeps the parishioners close around the sanctuary area. There's some very nice features as we get into the interior views of this church. But with the exterior, there's a Romanesque type style here, very tall. Instead of a single bell tower, there's a pair of bell towers on either side of the entry corridors.
Also, you'll notice on this elevation, there's columns coming down at the front entry. In conversations with the community and, with the committee and our team, we felt that the columns kind of create a barrier and aren't as open as some of the previous churches that we've seen. In other words, it's not as welcoming as having a large open entrance.
And this facility was quite grand. Again, seating about 1,400 people. The detailed vaulted ceilings. You may notice on the floor, it's a little hard to see because the pictures are a bit dark, but very detailed flooring patterns as you progress up to the altar area. Looking back from the nave through into the narthex, again, the use of stained glass, very large scale, very beautiful. A lot of the color in the space is fairly neutral, where the stained glass is adding that punch of color and interest. We loved in particular the way that the holy oils are displayed. You see they're kind of put in a case, and the baptismal font, you can do the full immersion as well as, doing just like we do at St. George, where you are basically sprinkling water over the heads. But the way they integrated the baptismal font into the altar, we thought was very successful.
So now we're going to talk a little bit about this master plan and how we took our conversations with the committee and all of our site visits and actually started to piece it together to create a master plan, what we thought suited the St. George campus best. The first thing we'll look at is the solar impact study. This is essentially just the orientation of the church and how we can optimize the orientation so that if we have stained glass on both sides of the church, it's getting natural light through it at most parts of the day. And really with stained glass, you want direct light, not indirect light, so that way you can get the colors really into the church. So one of the things you'll notice is really north-south is oriented parallel with Segan Road. Pedestrian circulation obviously is very important. For one, public pedestrian circulation, just how they get from parking areas to the remainder of the site, and in particular student circulation. The students are going to be using the church for daily mass or weekly mass, and we need to make sure that they can have easy access to the church, and the goal is to have covered access from throughout the campus all the way to the church entrance. Vehicular flow patterns. Vehicular flow in particular, you'll see the red dashed lines. This is the current stacking diagram for carpool. It's been brought to our attention multiple times how important it is for the flow of the carpool lines to work efficiently. So what we did here was we visited the site one afternoon and diagrammed how the existing stacking is so that we can make sure in the new master plan we can account for the same amount of cars. Another relationship we tried to make is the existing oak trees in the front of the site. How do we start to tie the church into these oak trees and use them as a space that could be used by the students and the parishioners after masses, a small meditation space or even a larger gathering space where a teacher could bring her students out and use it so that it becomes more usable, since the oak tree is a very prominent element for the church and the campus. Proximity to the parish hall obviously is also important. Functions after the church and functions before Mass. How how do you circulate from the church to the gathering space or a reception space after making sure there's that close proximity. Here we're just looking at new relationships. You can see we've added a massing of the church on the southeast corner of the site. So this is the first shot at kind of the new parking layout with the revised circulation, vehicular and pedestrian. If you look at the dash lines, you'll notice we've rerouted the carpool drop-off line for the 5th through 8th grade on the south end of the site, but the younger kids, the carpool will remain the same. You also see an overlay of all the different relationships with the circulation, the access to the oak trees, and then tying it back into the parish hall.
So we want to take you back a little bit and talk about Living Stones and kind of walk you through some of the important features. And we're not going to hit everything in Living Stones because it's pretty exhaustive. But one of the things that we have to do is look at the relationship of the altar, the ambo, the tabernacle, the chair, the priest. How the congregation sits, the choir. All those things are really, really important. The Eucharist and how it's celebrated and how that's managed. So the congregation area. So two areas that we really need to talk about is the community worship space needs to be considered a single body. So we want it to feel like it's one. And I think that's what the committee kind of saw when they went to some of the other churches in Houston, was that the curved seats really started to create kind of that arm and make it feel like it was one single body. The priest, celebrant, and ministers together with the congregation, that's all the liturgical assembly, so they really need to feel like they're part of this community also. The primary ritual furnishings at the sanctuary area, you've got the altar, the ambo, and the chair, all important furnishings, and we need to look at how those are designed and how they work inside the space. The altar, as we say, kind of is the centerpiece of the altar. One of the comments in Living Stones, the altar service should be made of natural stone, if possible. How the altar looks, the design of the altar is really important relative to the concept of the church, and really it creates an important feature as you look vertically down, into the church as you enter. The ambo is secondary, but it's another important feature of the church and how it sits on the altar and the design of it relative to the blending with the altar, but not really taken away from the altar. The chair, once again, dignity should represent some significance, but really is secondary to the altar, so we need to make it nice, but not, as it says in here, grandiose. The baptistry is probably always one of the most controversial things whenever we do a Catholic church, and whether it should be at the entry, which represents you enter the church through baptism, or should it be at the altar. After lots of discussion with lots of community members, I think they are leaning towards putting the baptistry where it's located in the existing church would be adjacent to the altar platform. The tabernacle, technically we should only have one tabernacle, and that tabernacle should be service both the chapel and the church, if there is a chapel associated with this church, which there supposedly will be. The sacred oils need to be housed in a special place and technically should be close to the baptistry. We need to work on the Stations of the Cross and how they fit in there. It's really important. It was the custom faithful to follow the walk of Christ, and we need to make sure that we, address that so you can flow carefully through the church and do the Stations of the Cross. So what we did, and I'll get David to chime in, is kind of took the concept plans that we looked and a lot of information from all the different communities and all the different meetings and put together this concept that I'll let David kind of walk you through that shows, what the church could be.
So what you'll see here is kind of the radial seating that we took from a lot of the churches, in addition to the smaller straight seating at the back of the church. The intent here was that the seating at the back of the church might be roped off or not used for some of the smaller masses. so that you really have the sense of community, so that the church scale, we're looking at right about 1,000 seats, and the radial seating is not too much larger than the current church. So whenever you've got your Sunday and Saturday masses where you've got 800 to 900 parishioners, they're all sitting in the radial seating, and it's a lot better sense of community instead of everybody spreading out throughout the church. In addition, you'll see you've got a strong axis through the church. The axis, the intent is to pick that up through the site plan. So as you move through the site and enter into the church, that axis is continuous. Again, the altar, you'll see it takes on the form of the pews. So you've got this radius altar, and off to the side is the baptismal font. So the intent here is that you can have the baptisms during Mass like you do now, but similar to Christ, the Redeemer, the baptismal font is integrated into the altar, but at the same level as the altar, so it's not prominent. But whenever you do have a baptism during Mass, everybody can easily see what's happening there. Going back to the front of the church, there's a very large narthex, so this is the space where the sense of community really happens. So where you congregate before, after church, making sure there's enough room in that space for not only people to congregate, but if you have, let's say, Knights of Columbus or Girl Scouts or somebody, one of the different church organizations, there's a spot for them to come and set up, greet members, tell people who they're about, and any events that might be coming up. So trying to take the design of the church and actually make it usable for multiple things.
And one of the things you'll notice is that there's not a particular cry room. What we call it is a quieting room located in the narthex, which is the space at the entry that you would use as a quieting room if you had a child that you needed to bring in from the nave and quiet them for a minute and hopefully go back and participate in the Mass.
And also in that area there will be some televisions. So the intent is that you'll have a camera that'll show the what's happening on the altar streaming on a television in that space. So that way, even though you're not in the church, you've got speakers and you've got a television. So that way you still feel like you're part of the Mass and you're not separated. At the top of the plan, in the top left-hand corner of your screen, this is all of your minister areas, your priest vesting area, where your altar servers and your ushers would go before Mass. You'll notice these spaces are a little bit larger, so that way, whenever, I know it's extremely crowded before Mass right now, so this gives enough room for people to go sit at a table, practice their readings. It's really close to the priest vesting, so if you've got a question about your reading, you're able to walk over to Father and ask any questions you may have. On the opposite side of the narthex is all of your public spaces. So this is where you've got your bank of restrooms. So you've got your men's and women's restrooms along with family restroom and your janitor storage, general storage, and then you'll notice that a lot of these spaces we're trying to make multi-use spaces. So the bride's room, which is right here with the round tables, would double as the family room during a funeral, but also be the RCIA study room or meeting space whenever that was necessary. You can see on the transepts, this is where the Stations of the Cross are temporarily. As we develop the interior of the church, those areas will really start to be defined and detailed. So that's where we show them now, but that might not be where they end up as we design the interior. Also, you can notice these two small niches on both sides of the church. That's a placeholder for statues. So St. George statue, Mary statues, and there's been talk of the Holy Family statue. So moving forward, adjacent to the altar is the choir. Built on Living Stone says the choir should be part of the congregation. So you can see the choir is essentially a continuation of the radius of the church. So that way they feel like it's part of the congregation and you're singing to the congregation and not singing to the altar. Moving past the choir to the bottom right-hand side of your screen is where we've got our choir practice room. So this is before Mass. The choir can go in there, practice. It'll be a soundproof room, so they can get their voices warmed up and then come out for the Mass to sing. But this is another one of those multi-purpose spaces. So during Mass, whenever you have your children's liturgy breakout, the children can go and use this space for their classes and not have to leave the church. You also see right on the back side of the altar is the chapel. The chapel again takes on that radial seating, a little bit smaller, more private, but still a single step altar and then another step that would lead up to the tabernacle that's shared between the two spaces. The intent here is also that if you do have adoration, the second step becomes a kneeler so that you could use that for your adoration. On the opposite side of the chapel, you've got your work sacristy. The work sacristy is where it's more for your storage of your bulk Eucharist, some additional vesting so that the priest could use that as a vesting area for daily Mass since it's close to the chapel, and really a large workspace for any of the banners or vegetation that starts to decorate the altar for the different occasions. And then your general support with your mechanical and electrical would also be there. So this is the first look at kind of the master plan. You can see that we've overlaid the church on top of this just to give you a reference. And one of the main things you'll see is that axis I mentioned, really starting to pick it up on the site and carry it through all the way to the oak groves to give it that relationship. And I'm going to let Joey Furr talk a little bit about the concept here and how we try to create a relationship between the church campus and the school.
Well, I think generally when we approach church design in terms of site planning and the transition from the parking into the church, it's real important that the experience as you walk from your car to the church is a calming, settling to prepare you for worship. Also, a couple of the churches that were visited had very nice plazas. One in particular that was liked by the committee was more of an organic treed space. The other was more of a traditional open space for gathering in front of the church. We have the opportunity here to have kind of both, and so that's what this plan really represents. You transition from the parking along this side into a main entrance plaza, as well as we have a relatively large parking area on this side of the church. But you notice we keep the parking away from the front door. We want the community to circulate in and be able to enter the front of the church, so that the entire community would enter from in front of the church, and then there would be a gathering area outside of the church that would be there for gathering before and after Mass. Additionally, what we're providing for is a plaza that you can actually drive through. So day to day, this would be a paved area that would be decorative in nature, but would allow the load for cars to drive through here. So this can be used for your carpool stacking. But on Sundays or in times of in times when a Mass was taking place, this would have the ability to be closed. We'd also be able to use it to put a limousine after a wedding to pick up the bride and groom, or a hearse for funerals, so that we could have that expression of that activity take place right outside the front door of the church. Then under the oak trees, we have a kind of a different space that would be more organic in nature. There would be some meditative qualities, some smaller areas with benches where smaller groups might sit and meditate. The idea of an exterior series of Stations of the Cross out in this space. There are 3 large live oaks that we want to not only maintain but really design around and become kind of the feature of this part of the area. There's also one oak tree that is a water oak that needs to be removed, and so the idea is to use this area here to maybe create an outdoor gathering space that could be used for the school, to have an outdoor classroom, or for some type of outdoor service. At the end of this axis that would extend all the way through, and we think it's very important for this axis to extend from the oak grove all the way through into the church. The idea of a fire element that could be used for various times for various activities, and possibly a water feature that would tie all of the site together, and maybe even relate to the baptismal experience in the church. You'll notice here that we are proposing that we create a new entrance from the existing parking lot through this part of the site. This is another wonderful oak grove, and from a circulation standpoint, to come from the parking that is in front of the existing church through this space, it'll be actually a little closer to circulate into the front of the church, and you'll be able to experience both plaza areas. It's always difficult to get parking in front of the church without ruining the experience there, and so what we feel like we've done is we've put a critical mass of spaces near the church within 100 to 150 feet, but not ruin the experience and the transition of that plaza. But we do have a good number of spaces. We actually believe we have more spaces closer to the entrance of this church than really exist in your current site plan. But the important thing is the experience from your car to the plaza into the entrance of the church will be developed as a transitional space where fellowship and gathering and visitation can take place all along that experience, and really integrate the landscape of the entire campus into a more fellowship space with these two kind of developed outdoor rooms that really relate to the entrance to the church.
So here is just kind of a aerial image of what this could look like. Just the white massing of the church. We're still developing the architecture of it, but you can start to get a feel of how you get this real warm landscape in the front of the church with some trees, and creates more of a transitional space. So you come from your car into this green, a little bit more meditative, private space, and then transition into the church. Also, if you look at the oak grove, you can see we've started to create some berms around the perimeter of the oak grove. That's to give a little bit more privacy inside of there. So whenever you do, if we do add the Stations of the Cross or some small meditation areas, you have a sense of privacy whenever you're sitting down inside of that space. And between the oak trees, you can see the small fire pit that sits on axis and starts to relate back to the church. So moving on to the Early Childhood Center, this is, as you'll notice, the existing church. So it's a major renovation, pretty much gutting the entire inside of the church and rebuilding. Some of the benefits of using the existing church is that the larger scale and ceiling heights gives us the opportunity to do some unique features inside of the pre-K classrooms. One of the things you'll notice about the floor plan is it's a lot more playful. It's not as hard-lined and boxy as your generic classrooms. So the goal is to try and create something that really intrigues the small children and kind of makes them want to explore and get interested and excited to come to church. To come to school. And I'll let Christy talk a little bit about this.
So the program for the Early Childhood Center was done a while back, and the program was really more extensive than what we're able to share here. But what we're looking at is a plan that would have 6 pre-K classrooms. It will have a assembly area, multi-purpose area at the top left-hand corner, and administrative offices that are in kind of a slate blue color. And then in the tan color, we have another cafeteria type multifunction space. I think one of the things we'd like people to realize with this design, and it's one of our goals, is to create spaces that children can gather and learn in, and not just in their classroom environment. So in the corridor, you'll see where we have an elongated diamond shape in the main corridor. Maybe that's a space where you can do a storyboard or gather and listen to someone speak. We have a termination point at the end of the corridor going towards the mechanical area. Again, another gathering space. It's not every time that children can go outside, if it's raining or something. So these are places that teachers can bring students to. and do a type of activity, as well as the multifunction or multi-purpose space to the top. The classrooms, just to kind of let you know a little bit about that, we're planning on having approximately 20 children per classroom. And you can see the classrooms are self-contained. And just in a minute, we're going to be looking at some photographs that really are images and kind of thought starters and ideas we wanted to share with the community in the development of the space. So at the entry, you can see that on the left-hand side, when we saw this image, we said, okay, home run, yes, this is a pine tree, but with the logo that St. George has had for so many years now, we think it'd be great if there's some symbolism to church and school that kind of focused around that oak grove idea or the oak symbolism. We also like the playfulness of the pattern on the floor and the color. On the image to the right-hand side, you can see that the elements in the ceiling are a lot more fun. So we're trying to create an environment. This is the first time these children are leaving home, and that they're really excited to be here. A feature that we would like to integrate something similar into our halls or corridors is a scaled-down version of children's artwork and work that they do in class and how that's displayed. And I love how intriguing this picture is that, you know, maybe this one child is pointing to the little girl, hey, look at what I did, or look at my family picture. So scale is very important in our design. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, and this is an example on the right-hand side, how corridor spaces become multifunctional benches with cubbies built into a space that could have just been a hallway. And then graphics, here it's showing maybe ABCs with monkeys, where of course, being on the St. George campus, it might be a biblical type story that we move forward with along the corridors. Classrooms, we'd like to integrate elements, for instance, a reading loft that you'd see on the left-hand side. We know that visual access to all areas of the classroom are a concern for teachers, so we'll pay close attention to that and working out details with them. Also, you know, some of the other imagery, the use of color, the use of interesting lighting, again, to create engaging spaces. The bottom right-hand picture, where if you go back to the plan and look that most of the classrooms are along an exterior wall, there's an opportunity to make punched openings outside that we can create a window space inside most of the classrooms. And of course, that's another kind of element we'll look into as we design. Imagery, interiors, gathering spaces, you know, maybe there's an idea of a forest here. Of course, we'd do something a little more along a religious line. Platforms for kids to sit on, share with, maybe do a presentation for parents. And then on the right-hand side, again, it's the integration of color and shape and, you know, the use of maybe seating that's not fixed, that's very easy to move around would be a nice idea to integrate.
Well, we'd like to thank you for the opportunity to present kind of where we're at today, and what we'll do is open this up. We actually sat into groups and listened to discussions about all the different pieces and parts, and invite any opportunities to improve what we've done and address any concerns that anyone may have, and we'll document those back to the committee once we're finished with the meeting today. So thank you for the opportunity.